Yo, what's going on, guys? It's gmeiners here. I wanted to quickly go over every single thing that my team is planning on using on Saturday in the Epic Raid Race. This is going to be all the builds, the stat breakdowns for each build, and what classes kind of need what stats, and then also the meta damage options that we are at least planning on using, considering we don't know how the actual damage phases might look and how they might change. Also, I'm filming this on Wednesday night before the TWID comes out on Thursday, so I don't know the ban list. I don't know if there's any other information we're going to be getting on Not Swap, so take everything with a grain of salt. If I cover something in this video and it ends up being banned, obviously you can't use it, so you kind of go to the next best thing. That said, we did end up getting 14th in DP. Not the most insane placement, but pretty good, if I do say so myself, so just kind of adding that in there as a little resume thing. We did do pretty good in the last raid. I think we're a pretty capable team. I hope we'll do good in this one, but yeah, just adding that so that people kind of understand the level we play at. I'm going to start on Hunter because I'm playing Hunter, and then I'm going to kind of cover what Llama and Toity, who are Titan and Warlock on my team, are going to be using. So first things first with builds, I'm almost always going to be on Inmost Surturachne as my class item. I will combine this with Grapple Melee, Threaded Spike, almost always Golden Gun. You use the Golden Gun to hit crits and print orbs for your teammates during damage, so they get more crashes, they can spam more wells, it gives you like 100% guaranteed well up time, makes your damage phase really safe, which I think is super important because these damage phases are like a minute and 30 seconds long, like on average. I'm almost always on Ascension. I love Gunpowder Gamble. This is really good for your Surturachne DR uptime. It's really good for clearing like waves of ads too. It does a pretty solid chunk of damage. If you're on something like Iatros and you're doing the jumping puzzle section, Invis is going to be way more important. So run something like this with Tanashas, use that to kill the imps with Chill Clip, and then you're Invis. You can interact safely, you can hide from the other imps that spawn in after you kill like a wave of them. This is really, really beneficial. You could even run this the entire raid and you'd be just as fine. I'm going to cover stats towards the end of the video. Real quick, I wanted to highlight my health. Health is super low. For that reason, I'm running 2 copies of Recoup. Pretty sure this still works. 1 copy gives 15 health per orb pickup. 2 jumps it all the way up to 70. Pretty sure it's a bug, but as of right now, I believe it still works. So that'll help keep you healthy. I love combining this with 2 copies of Powerful Attraction. You could do 1 in like a Reaper if you wanted more orb gen. I just don't think you need it. I think this is like one of the most OP save your life cards that you can play. So if you're about to die, you ascend, pick up every orb nearby, and should get 70 HP per orb to go from basically 0 to full health in a pinch. Other than that, in my main loadouts that I have, I'm almost always running Yeartide Apex. I think the Goss auto is void. It helps rip Minos shields a lot better. The origin trait helps like disorient them, which I think is really OP. I just like this for the attrition orb gen. It's a tier 5, so you have access to like temporal armaments. You could still use like temporal blast if you even wanted to. Should be doing more damage in general during the epic raid. And then I also like this because it has more ammo gen. So I'll combine that and it'll compound with my special finders, my heavy finders to keep my ammo gen high, which means you don't even really need high weapons to gen your ammo. And then I have a siphon mod on to make orbs. I have heavy handed and a loader mod so that this feels really good to make orbs. And pretty much all of that feeds into special finny. The more special finnies that I do for myself and my teammates means the more that I get to spam mint retrograde in the mid game. I can casually use this to kill things like wyverns, hydras, minotaurs really, really quickly. And I don't have to worry about my ammo because my ammo gen is just so good. That is pretty much what I'm running for most encounters. You'll see that Mint and Augur tend to stay on in most of these builds. I do have another build right here where I have Renewal and Star Eater. This is in case I want to have DR, and on top of the DR from Renewals, I also want some more damage for my Golden Gun supers. In this case, I'm running, obviously, Dustfield Grenade. This is really good. This will give Frost Armor to me and my teammates, anyone inside of it. I can also use this like a Threaded Spike. Threaded Spike severs. Renewals also have their own like sever effect where they lower the damage reduction, or they lower the damage output of a target by 50% if that enemy is within them. So if you throw this at like a Wyvern, instead of getting like 2-shot, now you're going to be getting 4-shot, which should hopefully allow you to live in a lot more scenarios. Lastly, I have like an Outbreak loadout. Outbreak is still really OP if you're using it with a roaming super like Golden Gun. This lets you get off way more supers in a damage phase. So if you really just need to focus on printing orbs for your Titans or your Warlocks or whatever, this is still a really, really good option. as long as you have like 2 people keeping nanites stacked up. You just want to make sure the nanites stay stacked up. And something like a pop D's, it can be a little rough if both your nanite players are leaving and you go from like full nanites down to 0. It can really kind of kill some of the damage phase. I have a chicken loadout as well. This is my chicken DPS, chicken running. I don't have these currently applied. I don't plan on using them. Reason being, this was like one of the best damage rotations, which I'll cover later, but now it's just kind of overshined. There's still cases where you might want to use it depending on what gets banned. This just relies on Parasite and Mint Retrograde. Sometimes this is really good, depending on your setup, if you run double special as well. And all it really requires is a solar holster mod. So the rotation is very basic. Assuming you're on something like Mint Retrograde and Parasite, you're going to just shoot 1 Parasite, 2 Mint, 1 Parasite, 2 Mint, 1 Parasite, 2 Mint, and just repeat that. And the holster will basically do all the work for reloading your Parasite for you. Final loadout that I really have to cover is just my tractor loadout. Nothing special here. This is basically the same as the first loadout. It's a golden gun hunter, super basic. I'm just using tractor cannon and I'm using Inmost Cert so that I can grapple, grab the Chronons during Korgos, put them in the ring. If I burn my grapple and I want to get it back, I can, after doing the first ring, pop Transcendence, tractor, spam Smoke Bomb, and spam my Transcendence Grenade so that I keep proccing Woven Mail and keep extending that debuff while I get the second ring. As soon as Transcendence ends, I get another grapple for the third ring. So it makes doing the mechanic roll on Korgos really, really easy. Back on my first loadout now. This is just like my typical finalities. Just covering the stats because of not swap. As you're going to see, when I'm swapping between my damage loadouts and my mid-game running loadout, none of these stats are changing. None of these stats. We found out yesterday that if you change a single stat while not swap is active, the current not swap that's at least supposed to be in the raid on Saturday, you lose everything. You lose your ammo, all your abilities, every brick that's on the ground that you generated, all that goes away. So for that reason, stats are a little bit rough right now. You want to keep your super and your weapons high to deal good damage, which means you're kind of going to have to suffer in the other stats. On Hunter, this really sucks because like in mid game, you throw your spike a lot for ad clear and to keep yourself alive by applying Sever. You use Gambler's Dodge to get that back, which means you need to have a decent amount of melee stat so that your dodge works. You want a decent amount of dodge stat. Using your grapple and just everything feeds into Inmost. So you want a decent grenade stat. So no matter how you look at this, something's going to suffer. In my case, health, as I explained, was the main stat that kind of suffers for this. I'm currently at 140 super. I could swap this mod to tank a little bit of class ability energy to get up to 150. And then obviously when you swap to damage, you're going to get super font mod. So this will give you another plus 50 right here. TLDR, your stats are really going to suck on Hunter. So you need to kind of weigh how much damage you want to deal, whether that comes from super stat or weapon stat, with how much you want to stay alive. The one big, really important thing that I'm going to mention here, which might save a lot of like Hunter mains' lives, is that I'm probably going to default to running 0 or as close to 0 weapon stat in the epic raid as possible. This is like my current build for something I created that wasn't not swap based, which just has really good stats. The goal was to try and get 100 of each stat other than weapons across the board. A lot of people are going to tell you this is troll, but if you come up here, like right now where I'm sitting, I have 4.4% PvE damage for special and primary and 2.9% for heavy, just from the 30 weapon stat. This goes all the way up to like 10 and 15 for your heavy and special respectively, but I just don't think it's worth it. I think where I'm at right now is like a 3.5% average damage increase just for my weapons. So if I'm on a setup where most of my damage comes from super, it's even less of my total damage. It's like half that or 2/3 of that or whatever. And then it depends on how much damage you're putting into the total health bar compared to your teammates. Hunters tend to be the lowest class in terms of damage right now because they're just feeding T crashes to their teammates. The only person lower than you is going to be like a tractor player. So for that reason, you're doing probably less than a fifth of the boss's total health pool in damage across every phase. And for 100 stat investment just to get a small 3% increase in like your heavy weapon damage, I don't think it's worth it. I'm yapping a lot, but my whole point is I think you can just tank all of your weapons and just evenly distribute stuff here. The changes I would make to this build is putting on super fonts or super mods right here. So I'll do that real quick. As you can see, I'm now up to 145 if I were to go to damage all of these would change to super font mods as well. So that would give me 195 super and 0 weapon. So yeah, I'm losing that 3%, but it allows me to really carry my other stats and really help them out. A lot of people are also going to complain and say, oh, this is really going to hurt your ammo gen. It's not going to hurt your ammo gen that much because, again, if you're less than like 150, you have less than a 50% chance when you make a brick for that brick to have increased ammo. If you compare that to something like finders and scavs, if you have finders and scavs on your helmet, these have just multipliers. So they take whatever ammo gen stat you have and however ammo meter progress you're going to make per kill with a certain weapon, and it's just going to multiply it by like 1.33, for example, for a heavy ammo finder. If you have one special, I think it's 1.25. Each heavy finder, I think, is 1.33, so it's a third or 33% increase. And then this is 1.25, 1.4, 1.5. So this has diminishing returns. Point being, these compounding a good ammo gen weapon and a good ammo finder mod on your helmet is like 10 times more important for genning ammo than your ammo stat will pretty much ever be, unless your ammo gen stat is like approaching 200. A lot of yapping. Hopefully this helps some hunter players out there. I really don't think you need to have all that many stats invested into your weapons. If you're running something like, I don't know, 145, 160, like a good amount of weapons, then sure, maybe it's worth it. Just depends on your stats, depends on your armor, depends on what you have available because of not swap. That is pretty much everything you need to know on Hunter. If you have any questions about Hunter, I'm playing Hunter, so I can pretty easily answer them in the comments down below. Just let me know. Okay, moving on to Warlocks. This is what Toidy's running. Please, first off, ignore the stats. These are not the stats that he's going to be running. He's going to be our main support lock for this day one. He is pretty much just locked down to a single exotic, which is Boots of the Assembler. He'll be running this again in mid-game. He'll be running this in damage because not swap. Love it, Bungie. So yeah, he'll be running this in mid-game. He'll be running this in damage. This is really OP. These did get fixed. Also, shout out Bungie. When they said that these worked properly, they didn't work, but now they do. So basically, if you're standing in a well of radiance, you're constantly going to be sending these noble seekers out to your teammates. If everybody's in the well, they pretty much have 100% uptime on, what is it called? Blessing of the Sky, I think. I think that's the buff that you get. Either way, when you have the Noble Seeker that hits you, instead of 25% damage from standing in the well, you get 35% damage. So 10% damage for weapons across the board is really insane. Most bosses, he'll also be on Mint Retrograde, Yeartide Apex, Finality's Augur. In final boss for Koragos, as I'll cover later, he'll either be doing chicken rotation or he'll be using Haliatus because Haliatus is just broken. The new Exotic Pulse is also really, really good. This and Mint Retrograde basically have the same DPS, but this has more total damage output. It just kind of takes longer, I guess, to get that damage off, but still same DPS value, more so just total damage output. So if you're not running an exotic in that slot, you can run Haliatus and the exotic. Other than that, I think if you're running Warlock and you're not on Boots of the Assembler and you have 2 Warlocks on your team, 3 Warlocks, you're probably just going to want to default to running Sanguine Alchemy for the extra damage, or obviously Speaker's Sight, so that you can throw down nade turrets to heal your teammates. Before we go over stats, taking a look at the subclass tree, he's going to be on Well of Radiance. He's a Well Lock. He has Rift so that he can combine this and actually like utilize Boots of the Assembler in mid-game. You could probably run Phoenix Dive if you wanted as well. Celestial Fire is really good for just proccing Radiant for you and your teammates. I think Snap in general is like better for killing, but if the main goal is to proc Radiant, I think this is just like always a better option. I think most of the Warlocks on our team tend to agree. Healing Nade makes a ton of sense. We use Ike Dash and Helion for the additional ad clear and the ignitions and things like that, and then Ike Dash for the movement and the survivability. I think movement is something that people criminally underrate. A lot of people are going to default to something like Touch of Flame. They might do like Helion Touch of Flame, Ike Dash Touch of Flame. The benefits that you get from like the Healing Nade just aren't really always as worth it for running Touch of Flame, especially if you're on like Speaker Sight turret build. That's something we've found. You give yourself some cure and resto times too, but it doesn't apply for the rest of your team. So if you're playing a support and you're using something to really only benefit yourself, it just doesn't always make the most sense, especially if it's going to make your own life harder to play. Fragment-wise, Benevolence is just there for the regen. As you're giving Radiant and Resto effects to your teammates, you cycle your abilities a lot faster. Searing is here just for the extra regen from creating fire sprites. Singeing for keeping your class ability up. Anytime you're scorching something, you get a bunch of regen. And then obviously you need torches to actually give your teammates radiant when you're using your melee ability. So pretty simple breakdown. Most locks on solar are going to look the exact same as this, just on different exotic options. Mod wise as well on Warlocks, it's pretty much what you'd expect. You have your Finders and your Siphon mods. You have mods that are going to keep your ability energy up. So you have like Impact Induction, Focusing Strike. You have the ability to make orbs with Heavy Handed through your melee. DR mods, Recoup, Innervation so that you get grenade energy back, a Scavenger mod. Like this is all very run of the mill. You have Special Affinity, you have Powerful Attraction to collect those orbs, and then obviously Offensive Bulwark, or not Offensive Bulwark, Proximity Ward, which is going to give you the Overshield whenever you do Affinity. So this is actually really useful too. When you're in Affinity, you have like, what is it, like 60 to 90% DR? I don't know the exact value. This gives you a huge Overshield on top of that. I think you have like 500 health from this as well. So if something is like beaming you and you need to survive like a nuke attack or something, you can do Affinity and really save your life, which is pretty valuable on lock because you don't have a ton of DR options. Lastly, these are the stats that Toity actually runs. So again, don't pay attention to the stats that I have on in game. Pay attention to his stats. Most importantly here, you don't have too much super because your super doesn't really increase your damage. It'll increase the lifespan of the well in terms of how many seconds it lives, but you really want to have as much weapons as possible, which you can see here for him. Naturally, I think you're going to end up having some grenade based on the archetypes of armor. So that's why he has 69, but his melee stats, his health stat, even his class stat really aren't that great. He's going to probably have fine uptime in general, as long as he's managing his Ember Benevolence procs, his Singeing procs, and things like that, because you get a ton of additional base regen through that. But at the end of the day, I think your ability cycle on Warlock is going to be a lot better naturally with those fragments than a lot of other classes. So you can kind of tank those stats and really just care about getting as much weapon stat as possible during damage. Okay, and then lastly, we are on Titan. Once again, covering these builds, the stat breakdown you should have. Don't pay attention to my stats. I don't have a perfect stat set up right now on Titan. Most of this information is coming to me from Llama and then also Talk. So those are the two Titans on our team. And they are basically going to be playing either on Arc or on Prismatic. Prismatic for the most part. As you can see, mid-game wise, we are on Curus of the Falling Star. This is because Curus is super, super important in damage, therefore you want to run it in mid game. It's also really good in mid game. This gives a ton of extra super regen as you're getting melee kills while you're amplified. So you can use your crash to kill tanky things in mid game and still usually get it back as long as you have the encounter mapped out well enough by the time you get to damage. Other than this, you could run a PK loadout depending on how your team has damage set up. For example, if you want to do Korgos and have your tractor always by Korgos in the well, not on the person who's running and doing mechanics, you can have your PK person on tractor doing double SMG, single SMG, using like Antidate for damage, still putting up really good damage values. And even though your crashes aren't hitting for higher values with Curus, you get more crashes per damage phase. So it's still really, really good. You could obviously also do this on Finality's Augur. So you're spamming SMG, proccing bait and switch, while you also have Finalities doing damage for you. For the most part, though, we found it to be best to run T-Crash for our damage setups. So for that reason, again, Curus in the mid game, you're going to be typically on Prismatic. You're going to be on T-Crash. You can run Barricade if you want, or Thruster for movement. You're going to want to be on multiple melees for Consecration, and then like Glacier Nade or Shackle Nade, depending on what you need to do, whether you want to suspend something, if it's like a Wyvern that you can suspend, or just to build Transcendence energy. Knockout, Consecration are still your go-to aspects. There's really no reason to use anything else. Diamond Lance with Knockout was like a really good build if you used Thunderclap. It just really heavily relied on using Insurmountable Skullfort. You don't want to do this in a not swap meta because then you're losing a ton of damage options that you have, like again PK and Curus. So it's just kind of troll to do that. Fragment-wise, protection for the DR. You want balance for the ability regen. Curus is huge so that you can apply a darkness debuff and then hit with a light ability, aka Crash, to hit 10% harder, and then Faceted Dawn for Radiant, just for your weapons and like anti-barrier and things like that. Most bosses, again, it's going to just be like Mint, Year Tide, Finality's Augur. The other big thing that you can do is run this on Striker. If you do find value in doing bolt charge barricades, a lot of teams will do this on Korgos. Our team may or may not do it on Korgos. You get a little boost in damage. The big issue is sometimes these barricades can just kind of get ripped in half. We've also seen that it's somewhat effective to like just run Touch of Thunder on Knockout and use like, I think we found that Storm Nades were better than Pulse Nades, but you can do this with the Haliatus Rocket. Shoot a rocket, throw a grenade, shoot a rocket, throw a grenade, and just spam nades for some extra damage if you choose to play Arc. The downside, the mid game is not quite as good as Prismatic, but you could put up potentially higher damage numbers for you and your team. Mod-wise, very, very similar to every other class. Finder, Siphon, Scout. That means you're going to want a miner stat mod up here, which is perfect because you have to run a miner anyway to do super font ×3 to get your super up. Loader mods, heavy-handed. You could even opt to do like triple heavy-handed if you wanted. This is just the setup that Llama tends to run. He likes Focusing Strike for increased class ability regen. Your resist mods as per usual. He finds that his healing is good enough on Knockout, which is, you know, perfect. It makes sense for him. So he likes doing stacks on stacks to get more finnies off and then just double scav. You can easily get double scav with the scav discount mod. And then class ability, Special Finny, Reaper for extra orb gen, Powerful Attraction to pick up orbs when you use your class ability in a pinch. This is super standard, super, super useful. He also wanted to mention that things like Shoulder to Shoulder are really good for regen, and I think Elemental Benevolence, Shoulder to Shoulder is really good for DR. Elemental Benevolence is really good for keeping your class ability up on like an Arc Titan if you want to give everybody Bolt Charge. Because you're providing Bolt Charge to them, so you get more class ability regen when you're playing on Arc, giving them those Bolt Charge barricades. Hopefully all that makes sense. I would say Warlocks and Titans tend to be on like less loadouts, it feels like overall. They are really just reliant on putting wells down, buffing damage, and cranking damage on pretty much every single boss. That is basically every single setup. And then the last like majorly important thing is going to be Llama's stats. So if I look at his stat setup is going to be heavily dependent on super and weapons. His weapons in his super is going to be a lot higher than something you could probably get on like Hunter, maybe even Locke, because I don't think like health, you have Knockout, you don't really need any health. You can always run Recoup if you find that you need extra health as well. I don't even think you need that much melee energy. Even if your melee energy was 0, you can just build Transcendence, pop Transcendence, and get those 2.5, 3 melee charges back right away, and some extra ability regen in Transcendence itself. Grenade regen might feel pretty bad, but again, if you have one grenade from Rally, you can use that to pretty much build your entire Transcendence like dark meter, and then by the time you need to build it again, you probably have another grenade. So really the only majorly important stuff is super so that your crash hits as hard as possible, weapons to crank even more damage. I would say if you're on Arc Titan, a bit of class energy so that you can spam those barricades, but at least as long as you have like 90, maybe 80% uptime or higher on your barricades to give your team Bolt Charge, I feel like it's good enough for most day one settings. So those are the stats that he's rocking with. I think this is the class that is going to be doing the bulk of your damage in a lot of cases. So you want to make sure that super stat is really high and weapon stat is high as well. Okay, last but not least, probably the most important part of this damage for anybody who's looking to do well in this day one is damage setups. I'm going to cover the damage setups that we are planning on using for each boss as of right now. I am hoping that none of this information is useful, because that would mean that the encounters and the damage phases are changing so much in the epic raid, which I'm really hoping for, that none of this really matters. But if the damage phases are pretty similar, which they probably will be in all honesty, then these all should be really good options. Just kind of praying that this epic raid is very different from the original. So first and foremost, this is like the god loadouts. I would say this is the easiest loadout to use and the best for pretty much every boss's damage phase. This is going to be Finality's Augur. You're going to put this into the turret mode, shoot this up into the sky. You need to have the Catalyst for it because the Catalyst gives bait and switch, 30% increased damage. You're going to proc bait and switch, and when you're actually in damage, you'll be running something like Antedate. You could also run Yeartide Apex if you wanted to like really compound on your solar surges. Here I have 2 solar, 1 strand. Depends on the role that you have here. I think you'd actually want to do Chaos Reshaped and Attrition. You just don't have the rewind round option like you do with Antedate. But anyway, you'd shoot this up into the air, proc bait and switch with these 2 weapons. Primarily use your Antedate for the beginning, like 2/3 of the damage phase, and then save your mint and retrograde typically for the end. That way you always have ammo to constantly reproc bait and switch. And I guess just things like that. You just don't want to run out of ammo here and not be able to proc bait and switch again. This damage method right here, you can use for every single boss. You can use it for Apoptes. You can manage to use this for Iatros. You can manage to use this for Agreos. You can manage to use this for Koragos as well. With Koragos, I would say the downside is you probably want to use this for phase 1 and 2. And then phase 3, you need a much better burst option for hitting that final stand damage check, if that damage check still exists in the epic raid. This is like the loadout that you can't really go wrong with. This has really insane ammo economy as well. You can shoot your turret up 2-3 times during mid game and always have max ammo. Each time you put your turret up, I think it only consumes 3 ammo. And it just does tons of ad clear for you. It's like just a better version of Anarchy. Next up, in terms of demo rotations, another rotation that you can use on every single boss, and I mean every single boss, is going to be chicken rotation. If you haven't heard of this, again, I mentioned it a few times earlier in the video. You use Parasite. You want to get a times 20 going into damage. Your rotation is going to be probably shooting a Parasite, popping your super, using your super, whether it's a roaming or an instant cast like a T-Crash or a Golden Gun. Shoot another Parasite because it'll auto-load your Parasite when you're in super, and then you just start swapping to mint. You'll shoot 2 mint shots, go back to Parasite, and shoot this, and just keep repeating this until you're out of mint ammo. The reason that this auto-loads is because you have a holster mod here. We tend to do 1 surge for our Parasite and 1 surge for our mint here with the holster, so that's your damage setup. And the other thing that you'll typically use here too is a fusion, depending on the phase. Like if you have an instant cast super, you're typically going to find that you run out of ammo in any damage phase very, very quickly. And so for that reason, you're going to want 2 special weapons. Let me find the fusion that I use. So for that reason, you'll tend to run a fusion like this. This is a tier 3. You'd want a higher tier, but you'd use Reconstruction and Bait and Switch. And as soon as you run out of mint and retrograde ammo, you swap over to Finite. With this, you can just shoot 1 shot. So you can do 1 shot of this, 1 Parasite, 1 shot of this, 1 Parasite, and keep that rotation going. So that's kind of the chicken rotation. You're always just swapping between 2 weapons. It'll be Parasite and mint first, then Parasite and a fusion second. If you don't have Finite, maybe you can use Cartesian Coordinate as well. Cartesian would require 2 shots, then Parasite. Rotation is super simple. If you're afraid of this rotation, I don't know what to tell you. It's like brain dead easy. Anyone can pull this off with little to no practice. It takes very little optimizations. Works on every single boss. It will do more than enough damage to kill things if the damage phases are the same. If the Haliatus rocket gets disabled, which I'm going to talk about in a second here, this is going to be our default for Koragos, just because of how good it is. I mentioned Haliatus. That's because this is currently like the best damage weapon in the entire game right now. What you want on this is Cluster Bomb and Aggregate Charge. Aggregate Charge makes it so that when you have elemental debuffs affecting an enemy, it gives you a stacking damage increase. It caps at times 3. Times 3 is, I believe, a 33% increase in your damage. You can easily get a times 3 cap because Tractor Cannon weakens and it disorients or suppresses or whatever. So that's times 2. If you unravel, that's like almost a permanent times 3 for the damage phase. Anything else hitting like Bolt Charge, any Scorch from a Helion, any of that is going to be your times 3. So it's super easy to maintain times 3 for a permanent damage increase. Cluster Bombs, I think, is like a 45% damage increase. So you basically have 2 damage perks. This requires you to hit most of your Cluster Bombs. On Koragos, you're almost always hitting all your Cluster Bombs. You'd want to run this with Temporal Armaments because Temporal Blast isn't as effective. And the most important thing is the Bray Legacy Origin traits. Whenever you deal damage, it'll generate a ton of ability for basically the one that's closest to being fully charged. But in most cases, if you're just using one ability, it's going to be like your least charged ability. So for like Hunter, you can shoot a rocket, dodge, rocket, dodge, rocket, dodge, and stuff like that. In a damage rotation, you spam Haliatus. You make sure you have your aggregate charge up there. You just spam this as quick as you can. Aggregate charge times 3, and then you immediately go to New Malpias or whatever this thing's called. And this is really good too, because if you do have the catalyst for this, this will apply Unravel for you and your teammates as well. So you could start with this and then go into the Haliatus rotation, and one person could maintain Unravel doing this. This is like the best rotation in the game. It is insanely high total damage, probably higher total damage than anything else that exists in the game right now, for a realistic damage phase at least. It has insane ability regen, so you can combine this with a lot of really useful abilities to crank your damage up even higher. like dodge, for example, where you can just spam rockets, you can then immediately go into the rotation here. And then also for like a final stand, you can use quite a few of these rockets. I think you have 11 with this frame. You can use quite a few of these rockets to push to final stand. And then as long as you have like 4 or 5 plus some supers, you should easily be able to clear final stand. Like this, compared to what we had for final stand on like day one and what most teams used, should likely just gap everything and turn that like 15-second final, which is really hard to hit, into something that most teams are clearing in like probably 6 to 8 seconds. As of right now, my team is planning on doing 2-2-2, which is 2 hunters, 2 titans, 2 warlocks for the entire raid. I think we might swap things up at Kurios just because that was a bit harder the last time, so we might not want quite as many hunters in that encounter. But either way, I think as long as you have like 2 titans to crash and get a ton of damage on the board, and like at least a well that you can make sure is infinitely sustained, so your well is never going down, I think you're going to be fine. I do think people in general underestimate hunters. I think they're really, really good in certain damage phases. Like we've tried on 4 titans, and like 4 titans instead of having hunters versus like 2 titans and 2 hunters, where the hunters are feeding the Curus crashes orbs, it seemed to make very little difference. I think as long as your damage setup is good and optimized, you'll be fine. I also think a lot of these damage phases are likely to change. I think that's the biggest change up that they could have to make this day one feel very different from the original. In which case, if this goes to like a burst damage phase, I would say Hiatus, if this isn't disabled, is still going to be like the best option. Spam this into spamming Mint or the new Rocket Pulse. If this does get disabled, you're missing out on the origin trait. You're missing out on aggregate charge, but you still have weapons like Hezen, which are going to roll with like elemental honing or bait and switch, and you can still also get, I believe, cluster bomb in this slot too. So you still have other options to use for burst damage as well. I think no matter what, if you're a creative team, you'll be fine. If you follow this, I think you'll be fine as well. I think I covered everything that I could possibly want to cover in terms of builds, stats, damage, stuff like that. If you have any questions, comment them down below. I'm easy to reach on Twitter, on Discord. I'll be streaming throughout the week as well, and obviously the whole day one race. So I'll be live quite a few hours early before the race goes live and before that event starts. So if you have any questions, pop into stream, ask them there. Hope this video helps. Good luck. Peace.